the actual exam. That was until they round. Hello, thanks for watching, let's begin. Ghost and Michiru had wandered through the street looking for their target for the better part of 3 days. So far, they had come up with nothing, and Ghost was starting to suspect that they would most likely have to wait until the actual exam. That was until they rounded a corner and took a shortcut that led them through an alleyway. They softly conversed through one another until Ghost stopped dead in his track. Ghost. Leaning against a tree was a man with red robes and metal plating attached to his wrist, legs and shoulder. He had dark brown hair which was cut relatively short. Ghost looked at the man, taking in his features. The man dressed in red looked back. "What are you looking at?" "You." The hunter replied. "The descriptions match. This has to be him." "And why are you?" The man stopped mid-sentence as he came to a realization and smiled. "You two must be hunters then. How very interesting, you have certainly become an annoyance to our plans." "We aim to please." Ghost looked around and noticed no immediate konaha in. Not that it would last very long. "What's your name, hunter? And what of the other? Does she even speak? Or is she afraid?" Michiru stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "Afraid of you? We outmatch you 2-1. Your fleet is still weeks away." Ghost let his hand slowly wander to his katana before abruptly turning, letting a konaha fly from his hand. His konaha got deflected by a woman with black hair tied in a bun. She wore the same outfit and seemed to be around 26. "So, there are two of you, interesting." The women leaned against the building. "Hunters? What are they doing here?" "Ryodora." Ryodora shrugged. "I don't know, SIA. We didn't get to that part yet. But that doesn't matter. You know our orders, kill anyone who stands in our way." Ghost vanished and appeared next to SIA, grabbing her by the side of her head and slammed it into building she was leaning against. The hunter vanished once more and appeared beside Ryodora, this time slamming his knee in his opponent's stomach, causing him to bend over in pain. "You know how to use flash step," SIA growled as she regained her composure and charged forward. Michiru in the meanwhile was hesitant about how she would react. "I can't let Ghost fight on his own. He needs my help." Ghost grabbed Ryodora by his wrist and threw him into the charging woman, unsheathing his katana whilst doing so. The two unknowns slammed into each other and fell in a heap to the ground. They instantly recovered and was about to charge once more until they were forcefully reminded that there were two hunters. Michiru came flying in from the side and planted both her feet in SIA's face, crashing her straight through the back of the same building she was slammed in moments earlier. Ghost nodded his approval and charged Ryodora, who had unsheathed his own blade. The two met and clashed blades, until Ryodora gained the upper hand and overpowered the hunter. He followed up with a hard blow to Ghost's face, who jumped back to recover himself. "What's your name?" "Hunter." Ghost smirked at him, wiping the blood off the corner of his mouth. "The name's Ghost." He glanced over the shoulder and saw that SIA had recovered herself and was now charging the petite blonde, who in return held two konaha in a defensive posture. He used flash step once more and appeared beside Michiru, holding out his hand. But before he could finish his sentence, his hand got grabbed by another. "What?" He snapped his gaze to his left and took a sharp intake of breath. Standing beside him, preventing him from performing his jutsu, was none other than Kakashi Hatake. He lowered his hand and glared at the silver-haired jonin. He turned his attention to SIA and Ryodora, whom were being restricted by 3 other konaha shinobi. "That's what's going on here?" a young man with raven hair demanded as he stood in front of Ryodora. He had roughly the same height as him and still had the same hairstyle he had back in the day. His outfit consisted of a standard issue jonin vest with underneath a black shirt and black pants. "Suzuki, Uchiha," Ghost sneered at him before abruptly snapping his head to one of the other konaha. Standing there was Sakura Harano. The years had changed her appearance a bit. She still had her hair short, but the edges were now ruffled and a bit messy, making her look more like a shinobi, rather than a girl who spent half her time wasting on her hair and makeup. He asked a question. "Aim Kakashi said as he released his grip on Ghost. Ghost glanced to the last shinobi and saw that he was undoubtedly his replacement. He had his hair similar to his. Slightly spiky but more slick to the back. He had dark green eyes and smirk plastered on his face. Sumimasen. We were merely sparring with one another. But it got out of control. Sia bowed in an apologetic manner. Kakashi turned his gaze to Ryodora. You know the rules. Fighting isn't allowed. Ryodora snapped his eyes to Kakashi. I'm sorry. It got out of hand. If you want to reprimand me, I completely understand. We merely forgot. That mistake caused severe structural damage to a building. The unknown Konaha snapped back. What about you two? You aren't participants? Sakura asked, turning her focus back on the two incognito hunters. He just said that we were sparring. Is there something wrong with your hearing? Kunoichi. Ghost grumbled. This is just great. What is this? A whole fucking reunion. Be more respectful towards Konoha Shinobi. Stranger. His supposed replacement barked. Respect is not given freely. It's earned. And that pink-haired monstrosity certainly hasn't earned it. The hunter barked right back. Ryodora turned to leave. Sia following in his footsteps. It fun while it lasted, Hunter Ghost. I hope we'll meet again. Michiru looked at her companion, who merely smirked. I doubt you'll like what the outcome will be. He gave one last glance at Sia. Narrowing his eyes. The two disappeared from his sight and he turned to leave. Come on. Let's get some food. Michiru. Kakashi held up his hand, blocking the way. I haven't said you could leave yet. Who are you? And what's your purpose in Konohagakure? Ghost rubbed his forehead in frustration. My name's Orodochi Ghost, he then pointed at his partner. Hers is Michiru Hadile. We're here to watch the finals of the exam. Liar, Suzuki scoffed as he stood next to Kakashi. Ghost technically wasn't lying. He was merely skimping on the other part of his purpose. Hey, take. Why don't you keep your pet on a leash? It's unbecoming of Konoha to make accusations when they are wholeheartedly untrue. Wait, you're the one who was caused all that ruckus last night. The replacement spoke as he aimed his finger at Ghost. Wait. You did what? Michiru asked, quirking an eyebrow. If you mean that I was attacked by your compadres for having discussion, then. Yeah, I caused a ruckus last night. Stealing one of Hawk's most used terms. Are we free to leave? Michiru asked politely, knowing that harsh words would get them nowhere. Kakashi's eye settled upon the attractive blonde. Ghost could already imagine the mind of Haytake thinking at the speed of light. First, you'll be paying for the damage you have created to the building. Michiru reached inside her cloak and pulled out a checkbook. She scribbled something down and handed it to the jonin. Whilst the former blonde was mumbling on the background. Something about the unfairness of it all. Ghost glanced to his right and noticed the kunao he had thrown earlier, and before he could walk over and pick it up, Suzuki had already strolled over and reached for it. He momentarily looked at it before leisurely strolling over to the hunter and handed it to him. You showed some capable moves? But it's nothing to boast about. We'd have you flat on the ground in the blink of an eye. Orodochi Ghost let the kunao twirl around his fingers. Your brother certainly doesn't think so. Everyone froze and turned to him. Suzuki was the first to speak up. His eyes narrowed and his jaw set. You've met with Itachi. Kakashi shoved the piece of paper in his breast pocket and turned to the two. If you know where Itachi Uchiha is, you should tell us. There's a big reward for the one who gives us crucial information about his whereabouts. Ghost glanced at Michiru before turning his attention fully to Kopinin. Well. That surely is convenient, you are in need of information. And I'm in need of that check you just pocketed. Without hesitation, Kakashi pulled it back from his vest and held it out. But before the former blonde could grasp it, he pulled it back, holding it out of the reach of Orodochi. I spoke to him in Oto no Kuni. Ghost merely said, still holding out his hand. The Kopinin handed him the piece of paper. His head tilted slightly in curiosity. Where exactly and how long ago? Ghost tore the check to piece. It was in Otagakure, 3 years ago. 3 years. What good will do that? He's long gone by now. Sakura exclaimed. A deal's a deal. Hey take. Michiru, let's get going. If I'm going to stay here for a moment longer I might just kill myself. The rude Aimnin left behind a fuming Suzuki and an intrigued Kakashi. Sakura and Radu just looked on with a combination of anger and surprise. Michiru and the brown-haired missing nin from Konaha sat down at a table on a terrace overlooking the market square. You really should play along. Ghost. It will help us in the long run. He merely shrugged and took a sip from his drinking. His eyes soaking in everything there was to see. Konoha had changed little since his departure. It still had its low wooden buildings that didn't go higher than a 3-story building. The difference for him was that people didn't look at him in disgust. Surely. They were weary of him. But that was due to his affiliation with AIM. Or so it appeared for them at least. We'll be gone from here soon. Don't see the point in playing nice with these tree huggers. Michiru sighed. A small smile appearing on her face. You've changed since I last saw you. Orotochi turned his gaze the other way. Looking slightly uncomfortable. It's been 5 years since we last spoke. Michiru. What happened in those 5 years? Mister? What's going on? Ghost, she placed a hand on his arm and gently shook it. Snapping him out of his thoughts. I'm good. He let out a single cough before focusing his attention on his food. Taking a bite from it. Michiru decided to ignore his strange behavior and instead reached for the chopsticks and started inhaling her noodles. So. I must say. That kick you gave SIA was impressive. You waited for an opening and abused it, her teammate started. She hesitated. I got lucky. In a straight-up fight I don't know if I'll be able to handle her. Don't worry. I can handle them both. You make sure that the moment Konoha arrives you keep them back. He took one last bite from his food before he set it aside. You don't even have to fight them. Just keep Konoha away from us. Are you sure you can take them both on? They didn't look like pushovers to me. She looked down at her hands. Unsure what to do. Ghost waved with his hand dismissively while giving her a grin. I got some tricks up my sleeve. You do your part. I'll do mine. I promised I'd keep you safe. And I will. Michiru looked at him and actually took in his features. The man sitting in front her had brown hair, slightly spiky, but gravity slightly pulled it down. He had no markings on his face. Completely unblemished. His blue eyes almost seemed to glow and held determination in them. Not a shred of doubt crossed his mind. He's certainly attractive. I can't deny that, but he's got a presence that is very calming and yet at the same time, intimidating. You sure you don't want to take a picture? A smirk crawling on his face. A small blush appeared on her face and quickly looked away. Don't get any funny ideas. His smirk turned into a chuckle. I wouldn't dream of it. Mrs. Hadile. In return she threw one of her chopsticks at him, hitting him square in the face. As the afternoon slowly turned into the evening, Ghost found himself in front of a familiar building. The building in front of him had been completely remodeled and looked like something that fit just right in the village. Very interesting that when I lived here. The landlord wasn't in the slightest interested in cleaning this place up. The moment I leave it's all suddenly changed. Fuck this place. He walked past it and glanced at the Hokage monument. The head of the Yondaime. He had spent hours sitting on top of the man's head. Pondering just who his parents were. Only to realize he had been sitting atop it all that time. To think that he placed his own kid in such a situation. This village is messed up. He turned around and walked back to the hotel. Tomorrow would be the finals of the exam. He knew that Ryodora and SIA would most likely strike then. Inflict massive casualties along the way. What better way to do that when thousands upon thousands were watching? His priority was clear. Kill them before they merged with the demon. If he failed to do that, he should most likely have to trigger his own powers. I rather not do that though. Michiru would have a difficult time to understanding. He walked up the stairs and towards his hotel room. Glancing at the clock on the wall, he realized with surprise that it was already close to midnight and that he had let his mind wander for far too long. Entering the room, he already noticed that Michiru was fast asleep. He tiptoed past her bed and slowly pulled off his clothes. He gave her a glance and a soft smile tucked on his face that quickly turned into a frown. I should have done this alone. She isn't ready to face these opponents yet, but then again. In about 3 weeks all that doesn't matter anymore, so maybe this will do her some good. He slid in bed and let his weariness consume him. Rapa and Hawk nodded at one another as they dashed towards their opponent Syks. He was wearing a red cloak and had a big battle axe in his hands, befitting of a man his size. Hawk was the first to attack. He formed a series of hand signs. Katon, Gokakyo no Jutsu, a large fireball blasted towards the unknown and helped his hands in an attempt to block it. Now Rapa. Rapa made a circular movement with his hand before drawing it back and pumping it back forward. A long narrow bolt of lightning erupted from his hand and dashed forward. Syks saw the attack coming and removed one hand from the Katon attack and tried to block this attack as well. Rapa smirked and knew that this would turn the battle in their favor. Instead of blocking the attack, the bolt snapped straight through his hand and pierced the left side of his chest. With a roar of pain, Syks fell to one knee. With another, but this time determined roar, he ignored the pain and used both hands to push the Katon jutsu aside, ramming into a nearby boulder. Heavily panting, the unknown stood back up and charged Rapa, who grabbed his blades that were stabbed into the ground and met his attacker head on. He performed an overhead downward slash with both blades, but Syks blocked it with his own weapon. He pirouetted, effectively pushing Rapa aside and blocking Hawk's own incoming konaha. Before the man could counter with his axe, Rapa had already planted his feet in the back of Syks, who stumbled forward, straight into Hawk. Come to daddy, Hawk shouted, a triumphant smile on his face. He rammed a konaha into the throat of his seemingly unstoppable foe. With a grunt, he tore open the man's throat and let the blood-soaked konaha fall into the sand. Six mouthed something as his legs started to give out. With one last grunt, he swung his axe, but Hawk saw it coming and dodged it. Nice try, big guy. But you're done. Say hello to your friends down below. Hawk walked past the dying man and stood next to Rapa. All in all, they had some minor wounds, but that was well worth the price. You okay, Rapa? The man with the odd accent nodded. Nothing serious. Let's go home. Yes. Hawk nudged with his head and they managed with a steady pace to leave the desert of Suna and into the forest, where the temperature was noticeably different. Orotochi, Ghost and Michiru Hadile walked to the stadium, surrounded by hundreds of other people, intent on watching the finals with great interest. The Jonin exam were apparently similar to that of the Chunin, but in this case they had to showcase strength. With the Chunin exam you had to show the wit and intelligence necessary for that of a Chunin. These matches would come down to a simple yet fitting brutal one-on-one fight. Everyone had the chance to become Jonin, if they showed that they had the capabilities befitting of that rank. He saw Michiru fidgeting with her nails, picking at it. Doubt and worry were clearly visible on her face. He reached for her hands and softly squeezed. She looked at him and returned the gesture. How are you not freaking out right now? Who says I'm not freaking out? Ghost entered the arena, letting Michiru go through first. Beforehand they had stashed all their weapons in 2 scrolls, who Michiru then hid inside the sleeves of her shirt. They also knew that Chunin would be thoroughly checking for any illegal substances or weapons. After the disastrous Chunin exam that happened all those years ago, they decided not to take any chances. The downside to the security measures were the males in the detachment. Michiru merely twirled the scrolls around her sleeve, layered with a small but effective genjutsu. Along with an alluring smile, she managed to sneak the scrolls in easily, with the eyes of the Chunin still on her retreating figure. Ahem. the Chunin snapped his attention back to the next person, which just so happened to be Ghost. After Ghost was allowed through, he met up with Michiru, who discreetly handed him the scroll. Ghost took the lead and led them up a set of stairs, packed with other visitors whom were excitedly talking about the upcoming fights. Once they reached the top of the stairs, they took a left and walked back into the open air. In front of them were rows upon rows of stairs. Looking down upon the fighting pit, they could see that they were on the very top of the arena. And to make it even better, they were right next to the participation lounge, which was separated by a waist-high wall. A couple of the Chunin whom were going to be fighting soon were chatting with one another or talking to their friends, seated right next to the lounge, where the hunters were situated. Looking on the scoreboard, he could see that Sakura Harano and Nairatsuka were the first contestants that would be fighting. So, Sakura hasn't even made Jonin yet, pitiful. When do you think they will strike? Michiru softly asked as she sat down in their designated seats. Ghost focused a small amount chakra on his eyes until they glowed red. Luckily for him, this went unnoticed as his sunglasses obscured it. He could easily make out the dark chakra that flowed around the chakra tier. It looked like the ground had broken open and tiny amounts of chakra poured in. It's close. I think that 1 or 2 chakra-induced fights will reach its breaking point. They will use a technique to tear it open. From there, the demon that comes through will latch itself to the nearest person with the biggest amount of chakra. Kami, this is crazy, Michiru whispered, barely able to restrain her voice. Don't worry. It sounds crazier than it actually is. The hunter glanced over his shoulder to the booth the participants were in. The 2 unknowns had just walked in. 2 things. First, I have some extra tricks up my sleeves that will even the odds should one of them merge with a demon. If that happens, I want you to trust me, okay? What kind of tricks? She asked, locking her eyes with his. Just trust me, okay? She started fidgeting with her nails once more but nodded nonetheless. What's the other thing? Giving one last glance at the newly arrived duo, he turned his attention to Michiru once more. If it should look like I'm about to lose, I want you flee. Cheers and shouting erupted from the crowd as the first 2 contestants appeared down on the field. I want you to make for Tuva and warn the others. Okay. Michiru looked shocked. What? No. We do this together. Ghost narrowed his eyes, once more grabbing her hands to stop her from fidgeting. This isn't up for debate. If I fall, then that means that you'll be next. And I doubt you would be able to stop them both. You even said so yourself. Live to fight another day. All right. Michiru wanted to argue, but he merely shook his head and stood up. Don't worry, all right? It's just a contingency. He walked towards the contestants' lounge and hopped over, walking towards Ryodora. Ma. Orodochi-san. You know that's against the rules. Right, a voice behind him said. Ghost turned around and saw Kakashi standing in the corner, the shadow obscuring him for the most part. Copynin. I doubt you're a participant. Sakura certainly knows where to hit a guy where it hurts, the announcer shouted as he continues to highlight the fight. Neither are you. Yet here you are, breaking the rules once again. I begin to suspect that you're not here for the finals. Kakashi snapped his book shut and walked over. Actually, I am. I know who you are. You're not from Omegakure. You're the ghost that caused the Irosa massacre. Ghost sighed. And how did you find that out? It wasn't hard to figure out, really. You can change the color of your hair and wear a cloak, but you fit the description. So, what are you going to do about it? Kakashi looked at the ceiling for a couple of moments, seemingly thinking about his. Well, I was planning on detaining you. But I have a feeling you wouldn't go down quietly, so I'd most likely just kill you. Ghost quirked an eyebrow. Not even in the slightest worried. Well, rest assured that I'm not here to destroy your village or kill its inhabitants. Sakura advances to the next round. Naira is knocked out of the finals. Then, what are you here for? Will Kiba Inyazuka and Boku Tusa please come down? Your match is about to begin. Another wave of cheers erupted from the crowd. Ghost glanced over the shoulder and saw Michiru worriedly looking at him. He winked at her in the hopes to ease her mind. Hey take. I'm actually here to save your dash. Ghost snapped his attention to Ryodora as he suddenly strode towards the edge of the balcony. He instantly poured chakra into his eyes and noticed that the chakra tier was at its breaking point. He saw Ryodora and Sia jump over the edge. Much to the surprise of the other attendants, Ghost fully twirled around and started sprinting after the two, pushing two contestants roughly aside who stood in the way. Michiru, he shouted over his shoulder, not even sparing a glance. It's time. Hey. Watch it. Punk. Ghost. What are you doing? Kakashi shouted after him. But to no avail. The blonde undid the knot that held his cloak together and in one fluid motion as he vaulted over the edge while the brown cloth came loose and caught wind, momentarily floating before dropping on the ground in. Ghost used the momentum of his vault to slide at a ridiculous high speed down the wall. His dark hunter's outfit rippled as the wind slammed into him. Michiru looked on from above and saw her teammate sliding down with grace. He's absolutely crazy. She knew what she needed to do and sprinted across and dived into lounge, preventing Kakashi and the other Konaha shinobi from interfering. Listen up. I'm Michiru-san from the organization called the Hunters. We're here to prevent a tragedy from happening. I must implore you to wait until my partner's done. Suzuki flickered into existence next to Kakashi. What nonsense is this? I assure you, this is in the best interest of your village. Michiru glanced over the edge and down to the pit, seeing her teammate about to face off with two unknowns. As Ghost rapidly closed in on the ground, he quickly looked around and saw that Ryodora and Sia were already casually walking over, ignoring the shouts from both the fighters and Shikamaru, whom was the Jonin in charge of the finals. With only mere meters away from the ground, Ghost used his ability, Flash Step, to appear on the ground, looking only ruffled due to the wind. Glad to see you could join us, Ghost. Looking ahead, he saw both Ryodora and Sia smiling at him. If you think I'm going to allow you to merge with that beast, you're sorely mistaken. He could hear the sound of air being displaced and he saw Sia standing behind him. But before he could react to it, someone else spoke up. Oi! What do you think you're doing? This is my fight. Go bother someone else. None other than Kiba growled in frustration. Whilst Kiba hadn't changed all that much, his dog certainly had. It had grown to the size of a small horse, growling its teeth at the trio. Team. For your sake, flee while you can. Kiba glanced at Shikamaru and he himself was already preparing his trademark Cage Main no Jutsu. Ghost witnessed the same thing and knew that he had to take care of the Nara first. He dashed forward and before Kiba or the unknowns could intervene, he had grabbed Shikamaru's arm, twisted it and then threw Shikamaru into the stands. You'll pay for that. Kiba roared as he charged the hunter. Ghost in turn glanced at the deadly duo whom paid him no mind and proceeded towards the tier. Fuck. This is precious time I'm wasting. He abruptly turned to Kiba. Using Flash Step, the hunter appeared next to him and rammed his elbow against the Inyazuka's temple, who instantly smacked to the ground, shaking his head as he tried to comprehend what just happened. Ghost didn't allow him any reprieve and imitated his earlier move by grabbing Kiba and snapping the bone inside his wrist. But before he could throw Kiba into the stands, he retaliated. A claw shot up and tried to pierce his throat. Ghost jerked his head to the side and the clawed hand of Kiba snapped past his face. Enough. You're wasting my time. The former blonde roared and grabbed Kiba by the throat with his gauntlet. He started with a knee in the man's solar plexus and continued with a barrage of fists that battered his face almost beyond recognition. Ghost turned and threw the Inyazuka into the incoming hound. Pathetic. The hunter extended his hand and let out a burst of pure chakra. Chakra push. It collided with the two figures and they too got slammed into the stands. You aren't even capable of killing. Sia roared as she came charging in, her blade held high above her head. Ghost in return quickly unsheathed his own katana and met her straight on, blocking her downward swing with a horizontal block. He kicked her away and stuck his katana in the sand before weaving through a couple of hand signs. Katon, Hosenka no Jutsu, a series of small fireballs roared towards Ryodora, whom was forced to use Flash Step, reappearing on the top floor of the arena stands. The hunter instantly locked his eyes on the figure and mimicked his foe's ability. Appearing right next to him, he grabbed the unknown by his face with his gauntleted hand, throwing him into the wall behind the audience, whom were cowering in their seat, hoping not to get caught in the crossfire. Michiru meanwhile had seen the exchange and turned her attention back to Kakashi. You need to tell your Hokage that she has to call off her ninja. Ghost can handle it. Your friend just attacked Kiba and Shikamaru, Sakura exclaimed, waving her hand towards the two downed comrades. They were about to attack him. You saw that he could easily have killed them. But he didn't. We're here purely for those two. What kind of threat do they pose to our village? Michiru hesitated. She knew that telling them the entire story wouldn't be received well. They have an ability to summon a creature that will try to slaughter anyone in its sight. What kind of creature? By now Ino and Shuji had appeared as well. Ada dot. She got interrupted as an explosion occurred, followed by another. A demon. Similar to a Baijuyo. They looked at her with eyes of surprise and disbelief. Suzuki was the first who spoke up. You're lying. That's impossible. Michiru shook her head. She saw Umbu and Jonin everywhere setting up a position, preparing to eliminate the threat. You have to believe me. If we wanted to cause any harm to this village, we've had ample time. Her voice raised. Frustration and worry started lacing visible on her face. Kakashi glanced between the trio fighting and the shinobi standing guard. He pulled his headband up, revealing his Sharingan. All right. Evacuate the remaining civilians. I'll notify the Hokage. Don't engage and stand by. You can't be serious. Ino shrilled. Look at what he did to Shikamaru and Kiba. We'll deal with that afterwards. For now follow my orders. With that he shined away. Michiru unclasped her cloak as well, letting out a small sigh of relief. At least that's dealt with, now time to help. Ghost. She ignored the tremble of fear and dashed forward. Ryodora saw her coming and smirked. He dodged Ghost's high sweep and grabbed his wrist, flipping the hunter over his shoulder and down the arena wall towards the pit. He instantly saw that the newcomer changed her direction in an attempt to intercept her ally. SIA. Kill her now. SIA nodded and dashed toward Michiru, who didn't notice the new threat behind her. As Ghost was free-falling, he managed to catch a glimpse of SIA before she disappeared. She's going for Michiru. He grabbed ninja wire, with a konaha attached to it, and threw it toward the blonde, chakra enhancing the throw. Michiru saw the konaha swiftly wrapping around her wrist. What the? The moment the wire had finished its spin, Ghost gave it a hard pull, dragging her with him down the wall. A mere second later SIA blurred into existence and rammed the tip of her katana in nothing but concrete. Ryodora growled in annoyance and jumped after the free-falling hunter and quickly closed the distance before planting both his feet into his opponent's chest. Ghost grunted and tried to grab the leg but missed and could do little else as he was slammed into the ground. Sand sprang into the air as a small crater was formed by the impact. Ryodora landed next to the crater. You really should just give up. Ghost. Michiru slid down the side of the wall and sprinted over Ghost. As the dust slowly settled, Ghost came walking out. His outfit was ruined in multiple places. His entire left sleeve was in tatters. That hurt. SIA appeared next to her companion. He still lives. Not for long. The male unknown dashed forward, closely followed by SIA. Ghost grabbed Michiru and pulled her close. Hold on tight. He stepped forward and disappeared, reappearing beside Kakashi Hatake. He was standing in a VIP booth that was exclusively used for the cages. Glancing to his right, he could see two cages sitting, with their guards standing at the ready. The first one was a gorgeous redhead, the Mizu cage. The other one was someone he had once considered family, the Godame Hokage, Tsunade. He narrowed his eyes, holding back a sneer. What's going on here? One of the guards shouted. Ghost walked to the edge and stepped atop the railing. He turned to Michiru, ignoring the guards or Tsunade for that matter. Stay here. And remember what I said, all right? Let me help. I can fight. She stepped forward, letting the ninja wire fall to the ground. I'm a hunter too. You are. But you're scared. And I can't babysit you and fight them. Help me by keeping those konaha dogs out of the fight. He let himself topple over the edge, falling into the pit for a second time. Michiru bit her lip as she watched him fall. She turned back to the cages. You heard my companion. Leave the fight to him. I don't take orders from snot-nosed brats. Tsunade stood up from her seat and let her gaze lock with Ghost's falling figure. She agreed with Kakashi though. As long as her shinobi provided a perimeter and making sure no civilians would caught in the crossfire. Why not let them fight it out? Whoever remains standing at the end would be dealt with then. Kakashi. Set up a four-pronged barrier and make sure that all the civilians are evacuated. Ghost landed in the pit once more and dashed forward. He noticed that Ryodora was beginning the ritual to call the creature into their world. His katana was still laying at the top floor of the arena, so instead he grabbed two konaha. One in each hand. Sia intercepted the hunter and swung her blade. Only to be blocked by a cross guard. You really don't know when to roll over and die. Do you? Ghost pushed her off balance and swung one of konaha, slashing her across the face. Using the opportunity, he threw one of the konaha towards Ryodora, but got blocked by the katana of Sia. She had thrown her weapon to deflect his projectile. The dark-haired woman swung her fist and connected it with Ghost's jaw, who managed to block the follow-up attack and retaliated by trying to stick his konaha in her ribcage. The woman quickly backflipped and held out her hand, letting forth a steady stream of fire. The hunter was aware that unknowns didn't need hand signs to mold chakra and instead built chakra inside their chakra coils. The upside of this was that it could be anticipated due to its slower pace, whereas a proficient shinobi could perform jutsus faster. Chakra push. Ghost roared as his attack slammed against hers, and for a moment it seemed even, but it didn't take long for the hunter to gain the upper hand and Sia got the full brunt of it slammed into her. His attack wasn't deadly, but it was perfect for creating an opening or stopping a barrage of attacks. Creating another set of hand signs, he quickly formed the trademark jutsu that the Uchiha were known for. Katon, Gokakyo no Jutsu. The attack hit the unknown, blasting her away and out of the fight. Michiru looked from the balcony and had to restrain a cheer as she saw Sia being launched into the air. Ghost is doing great. The victory was short-lived as a burst of red chakra shot into the air and seemingly froze, engulfing the remaining unknown. Ghost widened his eyes in surprise and quickly dashed forward, his gauntlet already outstretched. Gotta stop him. A whip of red chakra emerged from the sphere of red chakra and grabbed him by the leg, crashing him through the wall of the arena and out the other side, into the village. Our dance was certainly entertaining. Ghost. But I've had enough. The red chakra died down and Ryodora appeared. Both his arms were transformed into something gruesome. Holy shit. Did you see that? Ino screeched, slipping an arm around Shikamaru in worry. It seemed that those two were right after all, Sakura responded as she looked down at the hole where the ghost got rammed through. We gotta do something. You heard the Hokage's orders. We have to maintain a perimeter, Shikamaru said between clenched teeth. His arm was wrapped tightly and strapped to his chest, minimizing any movement. It however did little to alleviate the pain that was already present. Meanwhile Michiru was dashing across the rooftops of the buildings in search for Ghost. Kakashi alongside her. There, he pointed at the rubble where various villagers were looking. Michiru jumped off the roof and came to a skidding halt in front of the masses. She started pushing rubble aside until she found a tuft of brown hair. Ghost. Kakashi joined in and removed the majority of the rubble. Ma. When you said you would take care of it, I was hoping that the destruction of property would be maintained to a minimum. Michiru pulled the unconscious figure of Ghost from the building and set him down against the broken wall. Come on. You got to wake up. A moan erupted from deep down his throat before a series of coughs brought the brown-haired hunter back to the land of the living. Sake. Michiru's sweat dropped. Really? That's the first thing you say after you got blasted through a set of walls. The Konoha turned rogue rolled his head from one side to the other. I take it? He's merged. He tried to stand up, supported by Michiru. She nodded. Yeah, he's too strong for you alone. Let me help you. Ghost looked down at his outfit. What remained of his left sleeve was now completely gone. The upper part of his outfit was mostly destroyed, revealing a tattered black shirt underneath, and his glasses were gone. His face mask was the only piece of clothing left that remained relatively intact. I got a trick left up my sleeve. Ive got this. He patted her on the shoulder and walked away, slightly wobbling but regaining his composure. Let me help you. Ghost. Ghost clenched his teeth and started focusing chakra in his lower left arm. I said. I got this. Dark chakra started swirling around his arm. With one last grunt, the chakra got sucked into this lower arm and turned into a horrifying monstrous claw. Michiru and the onlookers stumbled back. You're one of them, she fearfully asked, looking from his arm to his glowing red eyes. Ghost shook his head as he looked down at his arm. Not even remotely. They're not the only ones who can merge with a demon. Stay back. This fight will be over soon. He disappeared in a flash step, leaving behind a bewildered Michiru and an even more so surprised Kakashi. Tsunade grew tired of waiting and stood up. So far the man in the middle of the arena had done nothing, save the testing of his new abilities. All right. Send in dash. She stopped mid-sentence when Ghost reappeared in the arena. Ryodora slowly turned around and narrowed his eyes as he saw the change of appearance. You are a hypocrite. Hunter Ghost. You've done the very thing you tried to prevent us from obtaining. Ghost tilted his head, seemingly in thought. Not even close. This was forced upon me. You're going to destroy the shinobi world if we don't stop your kind. Ghost snapped his head to the left and saw Sia stumbling back onto the ring. Michiru. Come here. Michiru, whom was standing at the edge of the pit, next to Kakashi, darted forward. What do you need me to do? She still had doubt. But she had known Ghost for years now. I have to trust him. For now. Kill her. He pointed his claw towards Sia, whom by now had managed to catch her breath. Michiru hesitated but nodded. I won't let you down. Ghost returned the nod, and without uttering another word he vanished and popped back up next to Ryodora. He slashes wildly with his claw but was met with no resistance. Following the red chakra he saw the path Ryodora had taken. He's going for Michiru. He instantly followed his foe and appeared in front of him, blocking the strike meant for Michiru. The blonde hunter in turn didn't even bat an eye as she slammed the palm of her hand underneath the chin of Sia. Ghost twirled around and tried to strike his opponent in the side but was once more blocked. He quickly followed up with a quick and held out his hand. Chakra push. Ryodora dashed to the side and countered with an electric discharge that quickly shot to the former blonde. Once more turned to his go-to-escape maneuver. He quickly used flash step to gain some distance. To say that these unknown were an upgrade to the scouts was a slight understatement. I think you could use this. Ghost turned around and saw Kakashi holding his katana. He bit his tongue, refraining himself to insult the man in front of him. Instead he grasped the katana and gave the man a nod. Stay out of the way. The hunter could hear air being displaced behind him and saw Ryodora dashing towards him. He spun around and hurled his katana like a spear towards the unknown, impaling him and slamming him into the wall, with the katana holding him in place. Sia gasped as she saw her teammate hanging there and roared in anger. Michiru knew she had the upper hand in her fight and victory seemed imminent. The blonde continued to exchange blows, slow but methodical as she had the entire fight. She changed things up and gave a low sweep, letting Sia stumble to the ground. She followed up by slamming her fist into the stomach of the unknown. A retaliatory kick gave Sia some breathing room and used it to stand back up, holding her stomach with one hand. You fucking bitch. You think just because you've got control of the match that victory is in your grasp? When the others arrive you'll be put down like the mongrels you are. Just like Mararka. Or Sylar. Or all the others before that. Michiru held out one hand, while gripping her wrist with the other. She decided upon using a trick that Rome had taught her not so long ago. Tipura, she shouted. A thin beam erupted from the palm of her hand and shot straight towards her foe at an incredibly high speed. Sia widened her eyes in surprise. Not expecting an attack of that speed, she dove out of the way but only succeeded partially. The beam tore through her side and exited out of her back, slamming into the wall. Not wasting her opportunity, the hunter immediately dashed forward. She quickly reached for two konaha and grasped them tightly. Sia held up her own hands and a wave of flames flew towards Michiru. She slid to the ground and effectively dodged the attack. Skidding underneath it, she could feel the heat scorch the back of her hand. It's over. Her slide caused her to ram straight into the unknown and with one fluid motion planted both her konaha inside Sia's chest. Sia grasped her by the collar of her outfit. Go f fuck yourself. With the last of her energy she planted her free hand in front of Michiru's chest. The blonde in return tried to wiggle free but noticed that the woman in front of her still had a surprisingly strong grip. Before she had time to prepare, an explosion of flames erupted from Sia's hand, blowing Michiru away. With a smirk, Sia passed away. The attractive blonde groaned as she slowly sat up, wincing in pain as she looked at her chest. Her outfit was still smoldering and a hole in her outer robe showed the shirt underneath. That was close. That certainly could have ended a lot worse. Kakashi stood in front of her with his hand held out. She accepted his offer and he helped her back up. Arigato. Hey, take-san. Kakashi gave her a nice smile before looking at Ghost, who was eyeing the body hanging on the wall. It looks like your job is finished. The moment he said those words, did the eyes of Ryodora snap open. Ghost groaned and dashed forward, already forming a set of hand signs. Ryodora grabbed the katana and pulled it out, freeing himself. I think this is yours. He proceeded to throw the katana right back at Ghost in the same fashion he earlier had. Halting his hand signs, he intercepted the blade with his claw, preventing the tip of the katana from piercing his chest. He was about to counter when he already saw Ryodora charging in. Feet first. You stab me, I stab you. It's as simple as that. Ryodora roared as he rammed his feet against the handle of the katana, forcefully slamming it through the hunter's chest. Ghost silently gasped, not expecting the unorthodox attack. He fell to the ground with a thud. A large pool of blood slowly started seeping onto the ground, the sand absorbing a portion of it. Michiru screamed his name in distraught as she ran over, her hands shaking and her eyes locked on the unmoving body of Ghost. Kakashi watched the entire scene unfold and instantly turned his attention to the white-haired Sunin, who popped up the moment the hunter went down. We have to finish the job. Jireya's face was grim and his eyes were narrowed. We end this before anyone else gets hurt. With those words uttered, Kakashi and Jireya dashed forward, with Ryodora doing the same. They clashed in the middle with the unknown striking first, giving Kakashi an uppercut followed by a kick. He quickly crossed his hands in front of his face, wincing in pain as the wound in his chest protested. Jireya slammed into him with a raise-non, but his foe firmly held his ground. A red sphere, not completely unlike that of a Jireya's raise-non, got blasted from his hand and hit the Sunin in the chest, tumbling backwards. Doton, Shinjuzansha no Jutsu. Kakashi came bursting from the ground. A konaha aimed for the throat of Ryodora. He merely grabbed the incoming wrist and retaliated by slamming his sharpened claw inside the chest of the copy nin. But instead of blood flowing freely, the body turned blue. What the? The body became distorted and suddenly electrocuted the unknown, who shouted out in pain. Kakashi wasn't done however and came charging in with his trademark jutsu, Chidori. He swung his hand forward, intent on piercing the man's body. Ryodora twitched in pain but was otherwise still okay. He dodged the attack and created another red sphere, blasting it into Kakashi, who puffed into a cloud of smoke. Jireya now came swinging in. But this time the man had opted for a grander approach. Holding his hand above him, he rammed the humongous raise-non into the unknown, who didn't have time to dodge and got brought to his knees, trying to push the massive attack back. With an inhuman roar, the red-robed man started pushing back against Jireya's attack. As all this was happening, Michiru was crouched next to Ghost, hovering over him as she fearfully looked if he was still alive. His clawed hand had reverted back the moment he lost consciousness. A figure came running up and she noticed her immediately as Sakura, closely followed by other Konaha shinobi. Checking for a pulse, she sighed in immense relief when she found it. The blonde started to take in the damage done by the pierced blade. "Let me help you," Sakura said as she crouched down opposite from her. "We need to remove the blade first," Michiru said as she grabbed the handle. "The moment I do, you need to stop the bleeding." "All right." Sakura nodded. "I'm trained by Tsunade of the Sunin. I know a thing or two about medical ninjutsu. Are you REA-. Jay, just pull the fucking thing out already," Ghost muttered as his eyes slowly opened, once more showing the bright blue color. "Ghost. You need to stay still. You've lost a lot of blood. Just do it already." Ghost groaned as a sharp pain shot through his body. Michiru nodded and looked at Sakura, whose hands were glowing bright green. With a small grunt, she pulled the blade out. Blood oozing out of the wound. The brown-haired hunter significantly paled and grit his teeth as the pain increased. Sakura started applying her jutsu and slowly the bleeding stopped and the wound grew smaller. After a couple of moments more, she stopped. "All right. Bandage the wound and remain still. It's very important. How about you stay quiet? I can't even hear myself think," Orotochi growled as he watched Michiru bandage him. "Good job with taking care of SIA." Michiru nodded and smiled at him. "You scared me. I thought Ryodora had killed you." "He's gotta try a lot harder than that," he replied with a smirk. He saw that Michiru was done and tried to stand up. "Baka. You need to stay down," Sakura said as she pushed him back down. "What I need is for you to stop touching me. And let me finish my job. Kakashi and Jiraiya are already doing that." "The guy's finished," Sasuke said as he stepped beside Sakura. "You could be a lot nicer, you know. She just saved your life." Ino joined in. 7 years had certainly matured the girl. At least physically. Her hair was roughly the same. But she wore a purple outfit with bandages strapped around her lower legs and arms. Ghost could easily imagine her being the cause for many heartbreaks within Konoha. Would have lived just fine. "No, you wouldn't. You'd be dead," Sakura butted in. Before he could respond, Michiru butted in. "Take it easy, Ghost. Do it for me, all right?" "Fine." He grunted and watched as Kakashi and Jiraiya's impeccable teamwork was pushing the already weakened unknown to its limit. Ryodora was gaining ground and Jiraiya knew that if the man kept the pressure up, he had no choice but to destabilize the jutsu. He also knew that Kakashi was waiting for his opportunity. "It's done. Surrender now," Kakashi ordered as he appeared behind the man. A kunai poised against his throat. Jiraiya dispelled the jutsu and strode over. "Stand down. And we'll let you live." Ryodora knew that any sudden movement would result with the kunai being plunged in his throat. He held his hands up in surrender. "I surrender." "All right. Let's clean this mess up. Get Umbu in here and dash dot." Jiraiya started but trailed off when he saw Ghost walking over. "Ah, Orotochi-san. You're still alive," Kakashi said. But Ghost ignored him and grabbed Ryodora by his throat. The metal edges of the gauntlet digging into his skin. "How much men are on the way? How big is your fleet? What is your purpose behind your crusade?" Ghost barked questions at the man who only smirked at him. "What are you talking about? There isn't an army. It was only me and a couple of other individuals. Tell me now. I honestly haven't gotten the slightest of clues." Ryodora mocked and chuckled. Ghost sneered and before anyone could stop him, he reached for a kunai and rammed it in the side of the man's head. "There's your fucking clue." Chaos erupted. Kakashi and the other nearby shinobi got into an offensive stance. "You've gone too far now." He surrendered. Ghost merely sneered at him as well. "You don't even know what kind of man he was. I did you tree huggers a favor." Tsunade dropped to the ground, followed by the Mizukage. "You scared my civilians and sent them into a frenzy, and you injured my shinobi along with severe damage to various buildings here in the village. I was willing to let it slide because it seemed you did it to protect this village. But then you decide to murder an unarmed prisoner. Umbu. Take this man and his partner to interrogation. Umbu dropped all around Ghost and Michiru. Ghost merely smirked at her before turning to Michiru. Michiru, he appeared next to her. Ready to go. Michiru looked unsure. Are you sure you want to leave? In your current state? Orotochi wrapped his hand around her waist and pulled her close. I'll live, he let his eyes dart around. Locking eyes with each of his old friends. He gave a two-fingered salute. Do try to keep up, and with that he exhaled deeply before taking a step forward. Disappearing and leaving behind a trail of sand blowing upwards. Jiraiya looked down at the body of Ryodora. Somehow his claw had stayed. Despite his death. Ghosts disappeared the moment he got knocked out. Put their organization at the top of our list. And update Ghost's profile in the bingo book. I want him A rank from now on. Tsunade barked orders as she pointed at Kakashi. Of course, Hokage-sama. Ghost and Michiru came to stumbling halt in the middle of the forest. Both trying to remain upright. My god. Ghost. That trick of yours is incredibly uncomfortable. Michiru muttered as she rubbed her chest absently. Where the attack had hit her. Ghost groaned and steadied himself. Yeah, that is the downside. But you get used to it eventually. Michiru looked back to where she presumably thought the direction of the village was. That was one heck of a fight. Ghost grinned at her but quickly turned into a grimace. Yeah. It was a good one. All right. The blonde turned back to her partner. Let me take a look at your dressing. She lifted his shirt and noticed it was dark red. You really need to slow it down. Ghost. Sit down. Let me take a look at it. Ghost merely nodded. Exhaustion started to creep in. Not only physically, but mentally as well. The reunion with his old friends had been nothing, if not taxing. Despite the fact that they were a severe nuisance. He kept his focus on the task at hand and had completed it. Even if he needed help in the end. Two unknowns. With one being merged as well, we got lucky. He watched silently as Michiru slowly pulled off his bandages and replaced it with new ones. He glanced down at his wound before letting out a grimace. I can't believe he threw my own blade at me. Michiru chuckled. Well, in all fairness. You did throw it first. You realize you got konaha and shuriken for that, right? Ghost shrugged, which resulted in a hiss. It worked. So I guess I can't complain. Michiru tied the dressing off and lowered his shirt. Her eyes wandered to the rest of his chest, which had a small amount of scars blemishing his otherwise smooth and toned upper body. With a shake of her head she slowly stood up and held out her hand. To help him up. Ghost hesitated but decided he could do it himself and stood up. All right. Let's get going. I don't have the energy for another flash step. So we have to do it the old-fashioned way. I think I prefer that. So a win-win for me, she raised an eyebrow. Having trouble understanding why he behaved as he did. You don't have to everything by yourself. You know that, right? Ghost purposefully avoided her gaze and instead looked at their route ahead. I don't need any help. Everyone needs help from time to time. Ghost. There's nothing wrong with that. Needing help is a weakness I don't need. Let's go. And with that he had ended the conversation. He hopped onto the nearest branch and started picking up speed. She looked at his retreating back. Unsure what had caused his lone wolf attitude. They traversed through Hinokuni at a relative comfortable pace. Lacking a reason to make haste. For the most part they kept to themselves, with Ghost letting his mind wander to the events that had taken last couple of days. Considering all that had happened, he had to say that it could have ended a lot worse. I didn't kill any of them konaha dogs, I guess that's a win. The downside was that it had been messing with his head. Because despite all that they had done to him, they used to be his friends at one point. It wasn't easy to downplay that. Not that it was that hard either. Fuck them. I did what Mayu wanted to do and I can finally close that chapter. He looked at the setting sun and looked at Michiru. Want to call it a day and set up camp? Michiru snapped out of her thoughts. Yeah. I'm getting hungry. Ghost hopped down and landed in a small clearing. He reached for the scroll containing a reserve sleeping bag along with some spare food, an extra set of clothing and a spare backpack. I guess it's a good thing we decided on bringing extras. Michiru grinned at him. Well, I kind of expected we would be leaving Konoha with them snapping their teeth at us. Ghost nodded. I never really thought to bring our backpacks with us into the arena. But then again, that could have raised some serious questions. Michiru started preparing some food while Ghost scouted around, making sure they weren't followed. She had to admit that she was happy with her first fight against an unknown. Sure, SIA had been weakened beforehand, but she hadn't been dead weight. I honestly didn't expect Konoha to listen to me. I thought they would jump after Ghost. She heard footsteps approaching and saw Ghost approaching, still wearing his ragged outfit. How about you? Eat some food and change into some new clothes. Ghost looked down at his outfit and chuckled. Yeah, I should definitely clean up. Let me do that first. Keep the food hot, okay? He then tore off his damaged outfit and threw it on a pile on the ground. Michiru focused her attention on the food and gave her teammate some privacy. Michiru, wake up. Ghost hissed as he shook her. Huh? What's going on? She sleepily mumbled, rubbing her eyes trying to wake up. Hunter Nin are closing in and fast, Ghost said, causing the blonde to instantly snap awake. How long until they get here? She whispered, stuffing everything into her backpack. Give or take a minute. I had set up flares on the outer perimeter, but they'll be alerted as well. Michiru understood what he meant. Flares worked both ways. Neither of them were sensory types, so they had to use with the means available to them. We're probably screwed either way. But let's hide and hope for the best. Ghost quickly led her to a bush that had a fallen tree trunk beside it. Shortly after they had concealed themselves, a small group of 3 Hunter Nin landed in the clearing. Ghost glanced at Michiru, whom in return looked anxiously at her teammate as well. You can stand up now. We know you're hiding behind the tree trunk, a monotone voice spoke. Crap. Ghost muttered and stood up. He looked at the Hunter Nin and walked over. Michiru close behind. You're wanted by Konohagakure for crimes committed. We are ordered to apprehend and take you back to the village. Do you comply? Ghost rubbed his face in frustration. Are we seriously going to do this? We just saved your fucking village. Another Hunter Nin stepped forward. This time a female. You mutilated one of our own. Be happy we even take this approach in the first place. Ghost rolled his shoulder, to see if his wound would hold together if it came to a fight. The stabbing pain was the answer to his question. They're still alive, aren't they? They should have stayed out. Please decline our offer so I can tear you apart. She growled. She must be an Inyazuka. She's too emotional. He turned his focus to the Hunter Nin whom had spoken first. How did you know we were behind the tree? The man held out his hand and a lone bug flew out from underneath sleeve. Ah, someone from the Ibarame clan. How convenient for you. Ghost drawled before slipping his hand into his pouch. I take it? You're refusing our offer. Obviously. Your other friends can come out now. Can't we come to an agreement? Michiru interrupted as she stepped between Ghost and the group. 3 more Hunter Nin dropped from the trees. Last warning. We are ordered to take you alive if possible. But I honestly don't care if you don't surrender. A newcomer added in. Ghost got into an aggressive stance and Michiru followed suit. Michiru. You take the 2 on the left. I'll take the rest. She nodded and struck first, planting her left feet against the skull of her first target, snapping him away and through a tree. Ghost dashed forward, throwing a konaha at their feet, an exploding tag attached to it. He used the chaos of the explosion to appear behind the Inyazuka and grabbed her by the back of her head, slamming it into a boulder to her left and finished with burst of chakra erupting from his hand that hit her point-blank range, crashing her into a teammate. Ghost was forced to dodge when a large beast came barging and tried to rip his leg off. How could I forget about the Inyazuka's mongrel? He used the same attack again. Chakra push, the dog got blasted after its owner. He noticed the Ibarame and he wasn't too worried about him. He knew that his attacks were chakra-based. And while his chakra reserves had severely diminished due to the events that had happened years ago, it had still left him with bigger than large reserves. He looked at Michiru's fight and she was doing alright on her own. He knew she was a Jonin-ranked shinobi in her own right. But she excelled at medical ninjutsu for the most part. She had an adequate amount of chakra reserves herself and she often combined that with her chakra-based attacks that originated from her home country. Murarka. The young hunter snapped his attention back to his opponents and noticed that 3 out of the 4 hunters had grouped up and were using a tight-packed tactic. Perfect. His hands flurried about, creating a short string of hand seals. Katon, Hosenka no Jutsu, a volley of medium-sized fireballs were soaring towards the hunter nin. The back of his mind screamed for him to jump out of the way and he abruptly jerked to the side, letting his attacker fly past. But not before slashing his konaha towards his exposed side. Ghost grimaced in pain, before flickering towards the hunter nin whom had created some more distance. Oh, you'll be wishing you hadn't done that. Ghost's hands flew upwards and his fingers intertwined behind the head of the konaha shinobi. He pulled the man down and kneed him in the face. The mask of the hunter nin got destroyed in one blow, revealing the face of Shino Abarame. The once wild-haired youngster had opted for a hairstyle that was much shorter. He lacked any sunglasses, but that was likely due to his affiliation to the hunter nin corps. But Ghost didn't care if it was Shino or not. Once more clasping a hand behind the back of the hunter's head, he pulled him close. And with his other hand he rammed the konaha into the stomach of the Abarame with a sneer adorning his face. Watching his former friend drop to the ground, looking up, he noticed that 2 of his opponents were grouping up against Michiru. He also saw the Inyazuka girl once more charging at him with complete disregard of her unguarded posture. The dog was lagging behind and he decided he would strike first. He used flash step and grabbed her by the throat, using his armored hand, his claws digging into her skin before returning to his old spot, using the same technique. This is over. He gave a sharp whistle, causing all the shinobi in the clearing to give him their full attention. Glad you're paying attention, he shouted, squeezing harder. Having noticed the dog inching closer to his blind side, the beast backed off. This is your only warning. Leave now. I could have killed your team leader here, but I stayed my hand. The hunter nin glanced at one another and hesitated, causing the former blonde to lose his patience. I won't tell you again, he shouted in anger. They reluctantly agreed. Please let us take our comrades home, so we can give them medical attention. Ghost stepped away from Shino and lowered the Inyazuka back to the ground, releasing the hold he had on her. The moment Shino is home, I'm going to hunt you down, she snarled at him, her beast mimicking his owner. Ghost smiled at her, placing a hand on her shoulder. No. You won't. He then slammed his feet into her lower leg, snapping the bone inside. The Inyazuka howled as she fell to the ground. Her beast instantly charged him and he slammed the dog into the ground. The remaining hunter nin remained passive and obliged to Ghost's request. We'll remember this. Orodochi Ghost. Ghost turned his smile into a smirk. You're pathetic, he turned to Michiru and beckoned. Let's go. They won't bother us anymore. Michiru walked over and looked down at the woman twitching in pain on the ground. I'd listen to my teammate, if I were you. Ghost nodded at her and dashed away, with Michiru following in his footsteps. Michiru turned to Ghost. Was that really necessary? Of course it was. You were being surrounded by 4 of them. The alternative was me killing them both and then turning my focus on your opponents. Still, you were ruthless, she softly spoke. We are shinobi. It's our job to be ruthless. Ghost harshly answered. I'm not a shinobi. I'm a centurion, she corrected. Centurions are protectors of all innocents. She recited from an old book she had been given by Rome. Wake up. There aren't any centurions left. You and a couple of other hunters are the only ones remaining. Murarka is gone, he sighed and looked away, softening slightly. Look. This isn't your homeland. This is an entirely different world and you need to adjust to it. Michiru looked away. You shinobi need to show more compassion. Most of us do. They only forget what they are supposed to be. Maybe you should too, she said as she hopped onto a higher branch. When I met you, you weren't like this. We all have to grow up at some point. Ghost responded, glancing down at his gauntlet. They continued their trek towards Kawa no Kuni. They were almost crossing the border, and that would mean that officially they would no longer be hunted by Konaha's hunter division. Not that it mattered all that much. He could handle them without too much trouble. Do you think the others won their fights? Ghost seemed to mull that over. It all depends. We fought 2 of them. I don't think they did that with all the other villages. I think that our 2 opponents were in sync with one another, and that's the reason why. Our opponent also got merged. The others might have had more luck with that. Yeah. You're right. They should be all right. Ghost nodded before pointing ahead. There's the border. Let's use flash step so we don't run into any more trouble. Michiru looked apprehensive. Are you sure you can handle that? Ghost grinned. You just don't want to use flash step. Michiru merely pouted but stopped alongside Ghost and grabbed his arm. Fine. But if you start bleeding again, you can do it yourself. Before the 2 could prepare their method of travel, Ghost and Michiru both tensed up and instantly lowered themselves into a defensive stance. Moments later, 2 figures landed in the clearing, in front of the hunters. Orotochi eased slightly as he recognized the newcomers. Itaki Uchiha. Ghost softly spoke, nodding at the man before turning to his partner. Hey brat. Covering up the gray hair already? The second man spoke. He had blue skin and a fish-like face. His teeth were sharpened, ready to bite. He had a humongous blade wrapped in bandages strapped to his back. Kisame Hoshigake. Ghost said neutrally, giving the man a nod as well. What are you 2 doing here? We heard of hunters striking inside the major villages. We went to investigate. Itaki answered, his eyes darting to Michiru. It were 2 unknowns. One merged with a demon, Ghost answered before glancing over their shoulders. We should probably head out. I'm not in the mood for prying third parties. We need you to come with us. Itaki interjected, turning sideways. Ghost quirked an eyebrow. I'm definitely not interested. It wasn't a request. Brat. Things have changed. We need to talk. Itaki's piercing eyes locked with Ghost's. Leader Sama wants to meet you. Ghost narrowed his eyes. If your leader is still in search for the Baijuyo, he's going to be very disappointed. Our search for the Baijuyo has halted for now. We know of your situation. Itaki glanced down to Ghost's gauntlet. The hunter looked at his partner. Michiru, you need to head back to Tuva on your own. Can you manage that? The invasion is in 2 weeks. You can't leave now, she exclaimed, worried he would abandon their cause. Don't worry. I'll be back long before that. Didn't I tell you to trust me? She hesitated and glanced down at his arm. I do trust you. Despite that, pointing at his lower arm. Ghost raised his arm that was encased by the gauntlet. When I come back I'll tell you all about it. I'm not one of them. It's a rather unique story. She remained unsure but nodded regardless. Well. All right. But you have to answer my questions when you get back. Mister. Her teammate smiled at her and nodded. I'll tell the others as well. But for now, keep it to yourself, okay? Are you 2 lovebirds done? We've got other shit to do. You're still as annoying as ever, Ghost said, trying to ignore Michiru's slightly flustered face. Itaka turned to the blonde girl. I put a high genjutsu over the border patrol. You'll be able to cross without any trouble. How far is it to your base? Asked Ghost as he reached for his backpack and started rummaging through it. Less than a day. Ghost grabbed his remaining water and food rations and handed it to Michiru. I'll have no use for it. Take it at a comfortable pace, okay? You've got plenty of time. She nodded. Thank you. Orotochi-kun, she joked, adding in a wink for good measure. Ghost raised an eyebrow. I guess it fits, huh? She stuffed the packages in her backpack. I'll see you soon. Okay. Ghost turned to the Akatsuki agents. Alright. Let's get this going. The three dashed off. Towards the northern part of Hinokuni. Tsunade walked out the door headed to her home. In her mind she was mulling over the events of the past days. She had yet to approve of Sasuke's admission into Umbu, but she had little reason not to. She may have hated the Uchiha in the past, but he had proven his worth a dozen times over. It seemed that the boy had learned from his past mistakes. Whether it was true what the Uchiha had said back then still remained a mystery. Flashback. Years earlier. Tsunade sat behind her desk. Her finger interlocked and used as support for her head to rest on. Sasuke Uchiha. What do you have to say about your actions of the past 2 weeks? The Sharingan user stood silently, not moving an inch. To his left stood Kakashi Hatake. I needed to get stronger. Konaha doesn't care anymore that Itake murdered my entire clan. Are you that naive? Brat? We've just suffered massive casualties to our experienced Jonin. Priorities have to be made. Itake isn't on that list. He hasn't been a threat ever since he left. Once our ranks are filled up again will we resume our hunt for the traitor. And what of Naruto? Tsunade narrowed her eyes. She hadn't forgotten how much influence the boy had in regards to Naruto's punishment that ultimately led to his betrayal. That's none of your concern. Why did he betray the village? Sasuke continued, ignoring the Hokage's words. He betrayed the village because they were going to put a chakra seal on him. Sasuke. Kakashi answered softly. Did he leave because of me? Sasuke looked up at Kakashi. A mixture of emotions visible on his face. You were a part of it? But this was a long time coming. Kakashi muttered, locking eyes with Tsunade, who merely nodded. She hadn't been there when Naruto received the majority of the hate. But it had lingered on the boy, and being a ninja meant everything to the brat. This is not the reason you're here. You were betraying the village. Give me one reason why I shouldn't lock you up for the rest of your life. I was abandoning the village. But it was merely one step of my plan. I was going to use Orochimaru to gain the strength I need. That snake was planning on taking your body. You were nothing to him. And you don't think I wasn't aware of that? Sasuke snapped. I was going to use him. After he had served his purpose I would have ended him. And you think you would be a match for a Sunin? The arrogance. Tsunade snapped right back. It's arrogance to think you can't be defeated. I'm not talking about mere months, I'm talking about years. Tsunade glared at the boy before turning her attention to Kakashi. You think he can still be of worth to Konoha? Kakashi in turn looked at his student. I think he will be. He'll have to lose that Uchiha superiority. But I have some ways to fix that. Sasuke wanted to open his mouth in protest but refrained once he saw his sensei look at him. Listen to me very carefully. Uchiha. If you ever betray this village again, I'll go after you myself. I'll break every bone in your body until you're forced to live out the remainder of your days in a chair. Understood. Sasuke looked at her with something akin to fear and nodded. Glad we've come to this understanding. Sasuke turned to leave but was forced back by Kakashi just as fast. You didn't really think we'd let you get off that easily, right? The Jonin asked. Smiling at the boy. Tsunade smirked evilly at Sasuke and nodded at Kakashi. I think this punishment is appropriate for you. Kakashi reached for Sasuke's headband and tore it off, laying it on the desk of Tsunade. You're being sent back to the academy. A 6-month remedial education should go a long way. You can't be serious. Sasuke shouted indignantly. We're deadly serious. Your alternative is execution or a chakra seal. Choose your pick. Brat. A disgruntled Sasuke looked at his headband in anger and disappointment but deflated in defeat. All right. Get out of my sight. Tsunade turned to Kakashi. You. Stay. Sasuke silently left, leaving Kakashi and Tsunade alone in her room. Kakashi, did you find the kid? Tsunade asked him, turning her back to the man. Kakashi looked away in shame. No. Tsunade's shoulders visibly slumped. With a quivering sigh she turned around. I want all the squads to hold their positions and wait for new assignments. The rookies won't like that. Kakashi softly spoke. Nor did he. It felt like he had failed the blonde. That all of this was his fault. Tsunade walked past him towards the door. The copying could easily see the heavy emotions that lay just below the surface. I don't care. We've wasted enough time and resources on this. We need to show that we haven't grown weak. I want all Jonin to pick up the slack until we've increased the number of Jonin and Chunin. Of course, Hokage-sama. With a bow, Kakashi disappeared in a puff of smoke. End flashback. She opened the door and entered her house. Closing it slowly behind her. She lobbed the keys on the small table that stood in the hall and walked into her living room. It had been 7 years since she'd last seen Naruto. There had been sightings of him near Kumagakure, but he had dropped off the grid after that. Walking through the cabinet, she poured herself a drink and slid down on the couch. Throughout the years there had been whispers, of which Kakashi had always been eagerly interested in pursuing. But it never worked. Despite it all, she still firmly believed the boy was still alive and hoped that one day he would return. Perhaps it was time to send Jiraiya back out. See what he could find out about the kid. You got to come back to us, Naruto. Sasuke leaned over the ledge of the bridge as he peered down at the water. The fight that had happened in the arena and the following news that had reached their ears had certainly put things in perspective. I mean, 6 of our best hunter in against 2 of them. And they come back looking like that, damn. Koji said as he had his back against the side of the bridge, chatting with Shikamaru. That girl was holding her own against 2 of them. Orochimaru took 4 on and beat them with ease. Sasuke muttered as he listened to the conversation with one ear. When I get my hands on the guy, I'll rip him apart. A bandaged Kiba growled. Troublesome Inyazuka. That's how your sister ended up in the first place. She wanted to pay him back for what he did to you. How's she know? A soft voice asked. Sasuke turned around and saw Hinata Hyuga approaching. She had grown from a shy timid girl to a confident and gorgeous kunoichi. She was a vocal supporter of the Branch family and often spoke against her father. Despite this, she had garnered a lot of respect from the main family. Save the elders. She wore a light purple form-fitting dress that went to just below her waist, splitting apart at her thighs. From there she wore tight-fitting black shorts that stopped just above her knees. She didn't have anything covering her arms, except for the headband strapped around the upper side of her left arm. He's stable, but still in critical condition. He lost a lot of blood. If they hadn't brought him back when they did, he most likely would have died, Sakura said as she joined in the conversation, placing herself next to Sasuke. I'm glad to hear that. I guess it's the only positive thing to come out of the whole situation, she answered before turning to Kiba. Kiba-kun. How are you doing? I'm fine. Geez. People need to stop fretting so much. Well, don't get beat up then, Redu barked out, grinning at him, which earned him a punch on the shoulder. I honestly don't even understand what happened at the arena. It was incredibly weird. I think they were just bluffing to keep us out of the way, Ino said, steering the conversation to event that happened at the Jonin exams. Somehow I doubt this is the last time we'll be hearing of these hunters, troublesome bunch. Well, the other villages had similar occurrences. 2 strange travelers entering the village, closely followed by hunters. A fight breaks out, but nobody knows why, Sasuke added in, allowing Sakura to let her head rest on his shoulder. It's strange, Ino whispered, locking eyes with Shikamaru before straightening herself. I'm going to get some food. Who's joining? Koji, being the fiercest supporter of her idea, instantly grabbed her arm and started dragging her away. Let's get going. Shikamaru couldn't help but let out a chuckle as he followed his teammates towards a food stand, closely followed by the others.